Episode 22 begins late at night at Starlight Mansion. It's in the dining room that Andrew decides to have a meeting with the holograms. So Jericho told Andrew, well, the reason why we invited you here in the first place because it's our understanding that you're a musicologist. So Andrew wanted to know if there's a problem with the music. Well, no, Jericho says, because we needed something that's even better. We're tired of playing the same old stuff every time. After Andrew had thought it over about what Jericho said, and then asked the question, have you ever heard of Shangri-La? Then Jericho asked him a question. Isn't that a city that is supposed to have been a mess somehow? Well, Andrew says that Shangri-La is located in Tibet, believe it or not, and I don't think it's really a myth. So Andrew told the ladies, now believe it or not, Shangri-La does exist. So meanwhile in the living room, that's when Andrew told the ladies, well, I didn't exactly find Shangri-La per se. There was a tribe once upon a time that wanted to find it, but the problem is, none of them ever returned. So Jericho wants to know from Andrew, what's this got to do with music anyhow? Well, Andrew says, word has it that Shangri-La not just has music, but has all the arts and everything else. So Shayna, however, has a hunch. So I'm guessing we're off to Tibet, right? That's what she was asking Andrew. So meanwhile, at Tech Rat's rat hole, Tech Rat, who's Eric's second right-hand guy, just got some news from his computer that the holograms are heading towards the Himalayan mountains in Tibet. So, after finding out from his computer, he decided to call Eric to tell him some good news. So, at the Misfits Music's recording studio, that's when Eric says, say, what? Did you say that holograms are going to Tibet? So after hearing the news from TechRat, his second right-hand guy, so Eric says, okay, keep me posted, and then he hangs up. So Eric goes to the recording studio to talk to the Misfits to ask a question. Do you know why the holograms are going to Tibet? So Roxy asks a question. Why? Do we get a prize or something? As a matter of fact, you do. A trip to the Himalayan mountains, to be exact, Eric said. Then Eric told his bandmates that he's really serious about it. So Pizzazz told her bandmates, you know what, Eric's got a point. Then Pizzazz says that there's no way that holograms can go anywhere like Tibet unless there's a reason to. Roxy, who agrees with Pizzazz, and said, well, that's reason enough for us to go to Tibet too. So you know what this means? The holograms are not going to be the only ones to go to Tibet. Misfits are going there too. So meanwhile, the Tibetan airport, good news for the holograms and Andrew, they had just arrived in Tibet. And Andrew just introduced the holograms to Milky, who would be their guide. Then Andrew says, even better, Milky happens to be a friend of mine. So Andrew said to the holograms, well, we might as well get started if we want to get to the campsite just before dark. So even though the holograms didn't like hiking all that much, but Jim says, we got no time to lose if we want to find Shangri-La in time. So that's what the six good guys did. So while the six good guys are busy hiking through the Himalayan mountains, the first thing they saw was a mountain goat. Then we go to the Shangri-La song by the holograms. And as you may have guessed it, the six good guys continued to hike all through the Himalayan mountains to find this mythical city, if it exists. So after the song came to an end, the good news is that they set up camp throughout the night. Anyway, the next morning, back to the airport, the holograms didn't know that they're not the only ones that are going to find this mythical city. Eric and the Misfits decided to do the same, and with their guide. Then Eric told the Misfits the good news that this is Miam. Our guide had just told us that the holograms, along with Andrew and their guide, was there earlier. Then Eric says, even better, Miam says that he can help us find the holograms. So you know what this means? There's a lot of luggage for the Misfits to carry. So the Misfits, along with Miam and Eric, went to find the holograms. So speaking of which, back with the six good guys, the holograms, Andrew and Milky, they were continuing to climb up the Himalayan mountains. But what the holograms didn't know is that they realized that they weren't alone because they just heard a roar of a Yeti that's coming from nearby. So while the holograms are busy resting, they just heard a roar coming from nearby. And they were looking around, and Jim was asking Andrew, did you hear that? It's probably just the wind, Andrew says. Then she says, I'm going to go investigate. Well, don't wander off too far, Silker says. So Jim went to see where that roaring was coming from, and she had no idea until she was face to face with the abominable snowman, or Yeti for short. At first, the Yeti was going to approach Jim, but then it soon stopped. Then Jim had this thought, like, wait a minute, that Yeti isn't there to harm me. So when Andrew and Soki rushed to the scene, they told Jim, you gotta run out of here. It's a Yeti. But Jim said to Andrew and Soki, wait a minute, this Yeti's not here to harm us in any way. So what Jim did is that she stepped forward to touch the Yeti. At first the Yeti stepped back and hesitated, but then suddenly the Yeti allows Jim to touch him. And when Andrew saw what Jim did, he couldn't believe it. So he tried to touch him too, but then the Yeti ran off. And Jim says, now look what you did. After the Yeti went off, that's when Andrew's friend Silky had a hunch. He says, legend has it that a Yeti can show us to Shangri-La. So Andrew, who agrees with his friend, says, then I guess we're on our own. So back with the Misfits, Eric and their guide. As you can tell, the Misfits are not exactly happy they had to climb up the mountain. However, Eric said that their guide said it's a shortcut. Then Eric also says that with the help of our guide, we can catch up to the holograms in no time. Well then, Possess says, tell your guide to move a little faster. We're getting frozen here. But what the Misfits, Eric, and their guide didn't know is that the Yeti was spotting them from below. Then minutes later, as Eric's guide and including Eric and the Misfits were busy climbing, but then at the last minute, Eric begins to fall off first, but so were the Misfits. Back with the six good guys, Andrew, the hologram's guide, and the holograms themselves, that's when, once again, on the way to the village, they heard a roar from the Yeti coming from nearby, just like before. So what the Yeti did is that he told the six good guys what was going on, and that there was danger up ahead. So the holograms, along with Andrew and the hologram's guide, followed the Yeti to find out what happened. That was until when the six good guys saw that the Misfits, along with Eric, and of course the Misfits guide that was with them, they couldn't believe it. They too are trying to climb up the mountain before they could fall off. So Jim had a hunch. Maybe the Yeti wants us to rescue the Misfits somehow. Well, good news for the six good guys. They didn't have to look for very long because not far away, the Misfits guide, along with Eric and the Misfits, were demanding to be pulled up right away. So that's what the six good guys did. So one by one, Andrew, his friend, and the holograms rescued each member of the Misfits, their guide, and of course Eric. So now that the Misfits, their guide, and Eric was pulled up thanks to the good guys, that's when Pizzazz of the Misfits told him, see you later, much later. And so the Misfits, along with Eric and their guide, head off. The holograms couldn't believe it, along with Andrew and the holograms guide. So Kimber goes first to speak in her case to say, how you like that? They didn't even say thank you. So Shayna wants to know from the rest of her bandmates, what are the Misfits doing here? Then Aja had a hunch and says, all I can tell you is that they're after the same thing as we are. Then Jim, who agrees with her bandmates, says they're probably heading to the village right this minute. So meanwhile at the village, so just like what the hologram said, the Misfits along with the Misfits guide and Eric had made it there first. By the time that the Misfits, their guide, and Eric had arrived, Eric couldn't help but wonder why did Jim and the Hungrams had to go through all this trouble to find a village like this? Then Pizzazz of the Misfits had a hunch. Maybe it had something to do with music, she says. Well, too bad, because we just got here first. Just when the Misfits were busy setting up, there's a problem, because Eric says, bad news, ladies. We can't find any electricity whatsoever to set up our equipment. What do you mean there's no electricity anywhere? Pizzazz said. Think about it, Eric says. Without electricity, this equipment that we just got right here is worthless. It's useless. Then suddenly, two women came out of nowhere, and the older woman was asking Eric, who are you and what are you doing here? So Possess goes first to speak in her case to the older woman. We want to hear some music. I can tell you they's got some special stuff here. So the older woman told Possess of the Misfits says, well, if it's music you seek, then you can find it in Shangri-La. Well, Possess asked the older woman, what are you waiting for? Take us there. But the older woman refused. So after the older woman heads off, that's when Possess looks at Roxy and says, we didn't come all this way for this woman to wreck our plans. Roxy, who agrees with her, and says, then I guess we'll have to find it ourselves. Then suddenly, the younger woman who stayed behind apologized to the mistress and said that her great great grandmother has never seen people like them before. So what about it? Possess asked. Never mind that, Roxy said, and the younger woman had introduced herself as LaShawn. But that's not all, LaShawn says. My great great grandmother that you're speaking to, her name is Moanne. So back with the six good guys, they just couldn't believe what they've been through. They couldn't help but wonder what are the misfits doing to Tibet and why. So Kimmer goes first to speak in her case to say, I can't believe this. We just wasted our time rescuing these creeps. Well, we didn't have a choice, Jim says. We couldn't just leave them there. So Andrew told the hologram's guide we might as well camp up here. Then you mean we're not going to be at the village till the next day? Jim asked. I'm afraid that's all we can do, Andrew said. So the six good guys had no choice but to make camp. When back at the village, as you may have guessed it, the misfits are camping with LaShawn, who is Moen's great great granddaughter. So they wanted to know from her, you can help us out? Well, better than that, LaShawn says. I can only show you the way, but that's all I can do. So you know what this means. Pizzazz and the Baymates will now have to wait until morning to find Shangri-La with LaShawn. So that's what they did. At the same time, back with the six good guys, they too had arrived at the village just like what the Misfits did. Moanne, who was LaShawn's great great grandmother, told the holograms the bad news that the Misfits that were just there moments ago had already left, along with LaShawn. Then Asha told Moanne, those Misfits are no friends of ours. Then Moanne told them even worse news that the Misfits that just left moments ago had no idea where Shangri-La is, and they are with LaShawn, who's her great great granddaughter. So Moanne said that both LaShawn and the mistress will be back at any time. So Jim begged the wind to show the holograms the way, but just like what the misfits did, she refused to help the holograms too. So back with LaShawn and the misfits who had just left the village moments ago, but LaShawn and the Misfits didn't have to look very far because Stormy says, look, there he is. Because they not only found Shangri-La, but there's also a rainbow. So we ought to see the view from here by the Misfits from episode 14 last season. But after the song ended, the Misfits did know that LaShawn went missing. So Stormer was asking her bandmates, where did she go? Then Jetta of the Misfits just heard moaning coming from nearby. It's LaShawn and she's trapped in the thorns. But LaShawn tries to warn them and says, those are snow riders. Stay away. So Stormer made a suggestion and says, we gotta get her out of there. Thorns or no thorns. Well, Possess says, as much as I hate to admit it, but you're right. So off she and Roxy went to save LaShawn. Well, good news, Possess and Roxy managed to get LaShawn out. But now here comes the bad news. Suddenly, they're not feeling so well. When LaShawn found out that both Possess and Roxy were not feeling so well because of the Snowbriders, she panicked and says, we gotta get them to the village right away. Now Storm is getting increasingly concerned and says that there's no way that Jetta and myself can carry them back. What are we gonna do? Stormer asked. Now funny she should ask that because here comes a Yeti and look what he's doing. He's picking up Pizzazz and Roxy and carry them on his shoulders. So LaShawn says the Yeti can take us to the village. So all three of them followed the Yeti back to the village. So meanwhile there, with the six good guys, Jim, the holograms, Andrew, and of course the holograms guide. So Andrew, who told him that the chances of finding Shangri-La themselves are absolutely nothing. So that means that there's no way they could have found it even if they could. But then suddenly the six good guys just heard the sound of a Yeti, and he's coming to the village with Roxy and Pizzazz on his shoulders. And following the Yeti was LaShawn and of course Stormer and Jetta. So thanks to LaShawn and with a little help on the way, Pizzazz and Roxy are now in the main tent. So meanwhile there, LaShawn says that there's even worse news. There's no medicine that can cure the Snowbrider's disease. But there is something that could. Only the music of Shangri-La can save them now. After Jim have heard the bad news for LaShawn, so you know what this means. Unless the music of Shangri-La can save Possess and Roxy, this can mean a serious problem. So Jim had to convince Moanne to show her and the bandmates the way to Shangri-La and to get the music. Because, as Jim told her that without music, Roxy and Possess can die. So Moanne again refuses to help Jim. And then she told her, well, if those two girls have to die, then so be it. Back with LaShawn, Roxy and Possess are getting worse and worse by the minute. And they were watched by not only LaShawn, but also Stormer and Jetta of the Misfits. Things look pretty grim. Back with Moanne and Jim, after Jim tried several times to convince Moanne otherwise, but she still refuses to help her. Because Moen just told Jim that only the true and pure can find Shangri-La. You're false. I'll never help you. So Jim did what any desperate person should do. She changed herself in front of Moen into Jerica Benton. So as Jerica, she asked Moen a question. Do I still look false to you? Now that Moen knows that Jerica is really Jim, she was convinced otherwise and gave Jerica the map and says, here, this is the map of Shangri-La. Use it well. Go now, Moen said. Save those two girls. I won't let you down, Moen, Jerica said, and she heads off. So now the holograms, along with Andrew and of course the holograms guide, knew that there was no time to waste. So they're now on a mission to save Roxy and Possessor the Mistress. But the question is, can they do it in time? At first, Jim didn't see Shangri-La anywhere, and she told her bandmates, I don't understand. The map said it was right here. Now Jim has her eyes closed in shame and told her bandmates maybe Shangri-La is just a myth after all. But then moments later, Andrew's friend, who's the hologram's guide, says, wait, look, there it is. We found it. So after Jim, the holograms, along with Andrew and their guide, she says, well, what are we standing around here for? We got a couple of girls to save. So they went up to Shangri-La. So when the six good guys entered Shangri-La, they just couldn't believe it. The next thing that the six good guys heard was the sound of the gatekeeper saying, welcome to Shangri-La. Then the gatekeeper told the six good guys, allow me to show you around the place. The first thing that Jim did was to thank the gatekeeper, but she says, we got a situation at hand. There are two girls back there in the village, and they're going to die very soon. So when the gatekeeper wants to know from Jim and the girls, and including Andrew and the holograms' guide, what can I do for you? Well, Jim explains, and she said that Roxy and Pizzazz are very sick, and only the music of Shangri-La can save them. And if something isn't done soon, right away, then this can mean a serious problem. Well, you see, the gatekeeper says, here's the thing. When one person decides to stay in Shangri-La, they don't ever want to leave. And the best part of it is they never grow old. Not that there's anything to worry about. The holograms, along with Andrew and the holograms' guide, when they heard from the gatekeeper, they just couldn't believe it. They were in shock. So Jim told the gatekeeper, please, we don't have much time. We must have your music of Shangri-La. It's the only way. Did you say music? The gatekeeper asked. Well, not only will I help you with that, the gatekeeper says, but if you want to play the music of Shangri-La, you have to do that for yourself, he suggested. Then the gatekeeper says, but there's only one person that can teach you, the High Lama. He can help you with that. Well, can you take me to him? Jim asked the gatekeeper. Sure, follow me, he said, and that's what exactly Jim did. So, when Jim went to see the High Lama, she just couldn't believe what the inside looked like. There was a bunch of collection of arts everywhere, and including music. So when Jim met up with the High Lama was asking her, "You're looking for music, is this correct?" "Why, yes it is," Jim said. So not only did the High Lama agree to teach Jim some new sounds from the music of Shangri-La, of course, that's because the High Lama said that nobody has ever asked anything like that before, just till that very minute. So when Jim explained the situation to the High Lama that there are two girls back in the village that need to be cured with the music of Shangri-La right away, then he says, if that's true, then the music of Shangri-La can't cure the two girls. So the High Lama and Jim both sat down and practiced the music of Shangri-La. That's Jim on the drums and the High Lama on the guitar. Then they traded places for a while. So after the High Lama and Jim had finished their practice, that's when the High Lama told Jim, "You've learned well. Use this music," the High Lama said to Jim. "Use it well." And so she left. And of course, she met up with her friends and, of course, Andrew and their guide. And they were having a picnic. So after she shows up and saw what had happened, she says, "What are you all standing around for? We have a mission to do." Then she told her friends Andrew and their guide, "We can have a picnic later, but right now we have a couple of girls to save." So the girls, along with Andrew and of course their guide, the Holograms guide that is, on the way out, they saw the gatekeeper who said, "You've chosen well. Now don't forget, Shangri-La will always be with you." And so everyone left. So meanwhile, back at the village, Stormer of the Misfits was pacing back and forth while the rest were inside and Eric was staying outside with Stormer, who's pacing back and forth, and you can tell that they're both getting increasingly worried. The Pizzazz and Roxy can die at any time, and they're getting worse and worse by the minute. So Eric made the case with Stormer. He said, "I know you're getting worried. Well, so am I, but I'm not a doctor." And that's when Moanne, who's LaShawn's great great grandmother, comes out and she told Eric, "Well, even if you were, you still couldn't save them." So Moanne goes back in to check in with her great great granddaughter along with Pizzazz and Roxy, and also with them was Jetta of the Misfits. So LaShawn had apologized to her great great grandmother for having them involved in this mess. So Moanne told her great great granddaughter that the only regret you'll have is that you're helping these misfits for greed and never for life. So suddenly, when Stormer saw Jim, the holograms, Andrew, and the holograms guy that just came back, she says, "Oh, thank goodness you've made it. Now please save them." So Stormer wants to know from Jim, "Is this music really gonna work?" "I guess there's only one way to find out," Jim said. So now Rhea, who has a pair of drums, and Jim with the guitar, she says, "Oh, I hope we can reach them in time." So both Jim and Rhea sat down and says, "Well, cross your fingers. Here goes nothing." And so both Rhea and Jim played the music of Shangri-La, along with a hologram song, "Let the Music Play." And as it happens, both Possess and Roxy were cured of the Snowbright poison. So when the song came to an end, when Pizzazz and Roxy woke up, it was a miracle. They were cured, and just in time too. And they saw Stormer and Jetta, and let's not forget Eric, who saw what had happened, that both Pizzazz and Roxy were saved thanks to the music of Shangri-La. Now you can tell that both Roxy and Possess were very amazed. And then Jim told them, "You girls are going to be fine now thanks to this music." And she's not kidding. So it's now time for the Misfits to leave after they refused help from both Andrew and the hologram's guide. So before the holograms, along with Andrew, can leave Shangri-La and of course Tibet, what she first did was to thank Luann and her great great grandmother for all the help that they did. Then Jim says, "Even better, we'll never forget the both of you." Then, possessed of the Misfits, told her bandmates and Eric, "If the holograms can find this place, then so can we. Come on, let's hurry." So after the Misfits, Eric, and the Misfits guide head off, That's when Jim says, "Yep, they're back to normal, all right." So Kimber told her bandmates, "I just can't wait to tell them, our fans that is, about the music we found." Even better, Kimber says, "our fans are going to love it." So back with the Misfits, along with Eric and the Misfits guide, they found Shangri-La all right, but then seconds later, right before their eyes, Shangri-La disappeared. The Misfits, including Eric and the Misfits guy, just couldn't believe it. Shangri-La, gone, right in front of their eyes. And so that ends episode 22.